My name is Ash, and I have a PhD from the University of Minnesota in Rhetoric and Scientific and Technical Communication. That's an extremely long-winded way to say that I'm an expert in how to talk to people about complex topics, like the COVID vaccine. Specifically, today I want to teach you how to talk about the COVID vaccine to people who are hesitant to get it. Some research has recently been done about the most effective ways to talk about this subject, and I wanted to share those with you today. I'll talk about what vaccine hesitancy is, why someone might be vaccine hesitant, why we should care about vaccine hesitancy, and what we can do about it. Let's get started. First, what is vaccine hesitancy? If you're not familiar with the term vaccine hesitant, you're likely at least familiar with the term anti-vax. Anti-vaxxers have been in the news over the past several years for a number of reasons, mostly related to occasionally deadly outbreaks of childhood diseases like measles that have otherwise been dormant in the US for some time. Vaccine hesitancy is not the same thing as anti-vax. We can think about people's attitudes towards vaccines on a scale like the one I have here. At each end, we have anti-vax and pro-vax. So anti-vax being people who believe vaccines are harmful despite the research that says otherwise, versus people who believe they are beneficial. At the very ends of the spectrum, we also have anti-vax evangelists and pro-vax evangelists who work to spread their own beliefs about vaccines to others. And then here in the middle, we have people who are vaccine confident, who generally believe vaccines are beneficial, but who might skip a flu shot here or there because they forget or because they don't make time for it. And then we have people who are vaccine hesitant. As I said a moment ago, people who are vaccine hesitant are not anti-vax. They may have a range of positive and negative beliefs about vaccines and about the medical establishment more generally. But for whatever reason, and we will get to potential reasons in a moment, they have enough fears or negative beliefs about vaccines that they are hesitant to get vaccinated. In terms of the COVID vaccine, someone who is vaccine hesitant may even be otherwise very vaccine confident. Maybe they get their flu shot every single year, but they're vaccine hesitant specifically about the COVID vaccine. The focus of this presentation is vaccine hesitancy, because in terms of persuasion, people who are vaccine hesitant are much more likely to be persuaded towards vaccine confidence than someone who is completely anti-vax. I'm not saying it's impossible for an anti-vaxxer to move toward vaccine confidence or even into a fully pro-vax stance. I'm just saying that it's a much longer term, more difficult project. And because the COVID vaccine is a pressing issue, that's where we want to focus our efforts, vaccine hesitancy. So why might someone be vaccine hesitant? Over the past year, and indeed for much, much longer than that, a lot of work has been done to show how large institutions in the US and across the world are systemically racist. And medical institutions are no exception, including medical research. Some 20th century examples include the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where Black men with syphilis were denied access to penicillin so that the researchers could find out what happens with untreated syphilis. And the development of oral contraceptives, which in the early stages were largely tested on women in Puerto Rico. These women were given a strong version of the drug. They were not informed that they were taking part in an experiment, and thus they were not informed of the risks of taking an experimental drug. 3 women died in that study, and their deaths were never investigated. Now, systemic racism in the COVID vaccine may be less about how the vaccine was developed and more about equitable access to it, which is a whole nother issue to be discussed. But the important thing to keep in mind is that dismissing the concerns of people of color in terms of medical research is both just historically wrong and also not persuasive. Other reasons someone might be vaccine hesitant include personal background, which can of course be related to systemic injustice, but could also just be that there aren't that many pro-vax people in someone's immediate environment. And then of course the rampant misinformation and or lack of accessible information about the vaccine. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the COVID vaccine, And the thing to remember is it is designed to be persuasive. For people who are very pro-vax or who believe very strongly in medical research, it can be difficult to understand how someone might see misinformation and believe it to be true. But the thing you have to remember is the people in power who benefit from circulating those types of messages work very hard to make them persuasive. And when you're talking to someone who is vaccine hesitant, just dismissing their concerns that are based on misinformation is not going to be persuasive to them. So all of this boils down to a sense of personal risk assessment. When deciding whether to get vaccinated, people take in all of this information in light of their personal background, personal experiences with the medical system, in light of systemic racism, sexism, ableism, and then they have to weigh the benefits and risks to them personally of getting vaccinated. And for some people, the apparent risks to themselves currently outweigh the apparent benefits. The goal in talking to someone who is vaccine hesitant is to show that the benefits outweigh the risks. So why should we do this? Why should we try to persuade vaccine hesitant people towards vaccine confidence? Basically, it's because of herd immunity. Now, herd immunity has been talked about quite a bit over the past year, but not always factually. Herd immunity is basically when enough people are immune to a disease that it stops spreading. Despite what some people have been saying over the past year, herd immunity cannot be achieved without a vaccine. And enough people have to be vaccinated to stop the disease from spreading and killing people. How many people is that? Well, for COVID specifically, we don't really know. For polio, it was 80% of people. Anecdotally, I have heard different sources estimate anywhere from 70 to 90%. 70 to 90% of people vaccinated to reach herd immunity. That's a lot of people. That's really a lot of information when we think about how much misinformation has spread over the past year about the COVID vaccine and about coronavirus more generally. A recent poll conducted by the de Beaumont Foundation found that only 41% of respondents said they were absolutely certain they would get the vaccine when it became available to them. That's not enough. So if we ever want to achieve herd immunity, we have to convince as many people as possible to get the vaccine when it becomes available to them. Right now you might be thinking, yeah, I'm with you, Ash, 100%, but what the heck can I do about vaccine hesitancy? I'm not a scientist, I'm not a technical communicator or anything like that. How can I possibly help? Well, the first thing you can do is talk to people. Specifically, talk to people you personally know and talk to them in a way that is informed by research on how language impacts vaccine hesitancy. One of the most important things about being persuasive is knowing your audience. And the benefit of talking to someone that you know personally is you know your audience. Another very important thing is that you have to use strategies that then fit with that particular audience. And again, this is where non-scientists and non-technical communicators can help out the most. You know your friends and family better than I do. So you can use the persuasive strategies that we're going to talk about today that might best fit with what you know about them. And that's it. That's the basic gist. In the following slides, I'm going to talk more specifically about who our audience might be and what strategies they might find persuasive. I have a few very specific suggestions at the end in terms of what to do, but for now, let's talk about the research. As I said a moment ago, one of the most basic principles of successful communication is knowing your audience. And in this case, knowing who the vaccine hesitant people are that we should be talking to. A poll was recently conducted by the de Beaumont Foundation in partnership with the American Public Health Association and others that did two things. One, it wanted to find out which folks were most likely to be vaccine hesitant, and two, it wanted to find out what communication strategies those groups would find the most persuasive. Here are a few numbers in terms of which groups were least likely to say they were absolutely certain they were going to get the vaccine. Or in other words, the people who were vaccine hesitant. Americans in rural or farm communities, Republicans age 18 to 49, Black Americans age 18 to 49, and women age 18 to 49. And that compares with, again, the 41% of respondents who said they were absolutely certain they would get the vaccine. And as we said before, 41% is not enough people to achieve herd immunity. So what strategies did these groups find to be the most persuasive? I have a couple of slides on this. This one will be a set of general recommendations, and then I also have an infographic from the de Beaumont Foundation that compares specific language, more persuasive versus less persuasive. And then we'll talk about some examples. So the first strategy is to use presumptive language. That's a fancy way to say, ask someone, when are you going to get the vaccine? As opposed to, are you going to get the vaccine? The first one presumes that they are going to get it, while the second one kind of still leaves it as an open question. You also want to tailor your message to your audience, and that's why it's important for you to talk to people you know personally, because you will know more than me or anyone else what they are probably going to find persuasive. And if you don't, or you're not sure, one way to find out is to ask and then listen to them non-judgmentally. And speaking of non-judgmentally, you want to avoid judgmental language when talking about or to people who are concerned about the vaccine. Basically, you want to have an empathetic and listening kind of approach. Why is that? Well, when you're dismissive of people's concerns, not just in one-on-one conversation, but vaguely on the internet where people can see, people will shut down. They will stop trusting you as someone to whom they can bring their concerns. And if they're not going to bring their concerns to you, there's no way you can be persuasive to them about the vaccine, right? They will be defensive when talking to you as opposed to open and ready to listen. And on the flip side, if you approach them with empathy and concern and listen to them, they will open up to you and they are more likely to listen to what you have to say. You also want to explain the benefits of getting vaccinated versus the consequences of not doing it. You want to talk about the people behind the vaccine, so the medical researchers who did these studies and who developed these vaccines, as opposed to like the science or the drug companies, right? And then you want to use and repeat the word every to explain the vaccine development process. So saying every study, every phase, every trial was reviewed by safety boards and the FDA. So these are general approaches. Let's talk about some more specific language choices that you can use when talking to people. This is an infographic that was put out by the de Beaumont Foundation based on their poll. You can see they've got two sections here: use these words more and use these words less. So you can think about these in terms of like a language do and don't, right? You do want to say, for example, a return to normal versus avoid saying predictability or certainty. You want to say things like getting the vaccine will help keep you safe versus getting the vaccine is the right thing to do. People who are not already convinced to get the vaccine will not necessarily find that language persuasive. You want to say vaccination instead of injection. You want to say things like medical experts instead of scientists or health experts, and talk about medical researchers instead of drug companies. And you want to talk about when people are skeptical or concerned about the vaccine versus saying they are misled or confused. Saying someone is misled or confused, there's a little bit of a values judgment in there, right? So let's talk about some examples now. One thing that the study found is that 1/3 of people they surveyed, whether they were vaccine hesitant or not, were concerned about long-term and short-term side effects. So let's talk about side effects. Say I'm chatting with an extended family member who teaches high school math. She normally gets her flu shot every year, but she's worried about the COVID vaccine specifically. She's seen some posts circulating on social media about really severe side effects. For her, I would start by being empathetic and listen to her concerns. Then I would say, yeah, that does sound really scary, but the medical researchers behind the vaccine found that the likelihood of experiencing a severe side effect is less than 0.5%, which of course is true. Because she's in math, she might be more likely to be persuaded by the numbers. If I can point her in the direction of a fact sheet or a study, that also might be really helpful. Telling her, oh, you shouldn't worry about that because severe reactions are super rare, is not going to be as persuasive. Even it kind of sounds like I'm saying the same thing, because that's being more dismissive of her concerns, right? So in this example, I'm foregrounding the people behind the vaccine. I'm thinking about her own background in math, and I'm being empathetic and listening to her concerns. Now, say I'm chatting with a coworker who I know is very interested in things like organic food and the slow food movement. She's not completely rigid in her food choices, but likes to prioritize organic, plant-based, whole nutrition for herself and her family. She also tells me she's concerned about side effects for the vaccine. For her, I might emphasize that the things we call side effects are actually normal signs the body is building protection, and that most side effects go away in a few days, both of which are also true. And of course, I will listen to her concerns first and empathize with her feelings. So again, those 3 statements about quote-unquote side effects are all true, and they are the top 3 things that poll respondents found to be most persuasive when talking about side effects. But I chose specific things based on what I knew about each of these people I was talking to. A few more examples might be that Republicans might be more persuaded by talking about the economy and a return to normal than by talking about trusting medical research. Like saying, the sooner you get protected, the sooner we can all go back to normal. Similarly, Black Americans may be more persuaded by talking about protecting their family than by talking about the medical researchers, and for good reason, as we mentioned before. Another example might be if someone talks about how the vaccine seems like it was rushed, you can use the metaphor of rush delivery. After listening and empathizing with their concerns, you might say, one way I've been thinking about the research is in terms of rush delivery, or like Amazon Prime. Whether I choose regular delivery or Prime delivery, the thing that I'm ordering is the same. But with Prime delivery, more resources go towards getting it here faster. It's the same delivery process, but this particular product, my order, is getting prioritized over all the other orders, right? So that's what the research says. Now, to move the needle on vaccine hesitancy, what do we do specifically? First, we need to have one-on-one conversations with people who are vaccine hesitant. We find out which of our friends and family have these concerns, and we talk to them using these strategies. And then 2, we can use the power of social media to our advantage. And I want to acknowledge both the opportunity and the limitations that social media provides. Most vaccine hesitant people aren't going to be persuaded by a single social media post, especially if it's denigrating to their concerns. But seeing multiple posts of people getting their vaccines and talking about their own experiences with it, that's likely to be more persuasive. Seeing several posts talking about the benefits of the vaccines in language they find relatable, that's going to be more persuasive. Also, hopefully these posts can spark additional individual conversations. When you make these posts, you want to invite people who are curious about the vaccine or who have questions or concerns to ask you about it. And you want to tell them you'll listen to their concerns without judgment. There are several tools for doing this available in the Vaccine Hesitancy Toolkit, available at bit.ly/3 lowercase px uppercase y lowercase dlt. Additionally, social media can be an effective way to share tools and resources with others who want to talk to their friends and family about the vaccine, but that could perhaps use a more research-informed approach. So, sharing this video and the social media toolkit on social media can help more people have more persuasive conversations with their vaccine-hesitant friends and family, hopefully moving the needle even further toward vaccine confidence and helping us all achieve herd immunity. Here are some resources to find out more about some of the content in this video. Most importantly, you can find the Vaccine Hesitancy Toolkit, which includes this video and lots of other resources for talking to your friends and family about the COVID vaccine. And you can find it at bit.ly/3pxydlt. Again, bit.ly/3 lowercase px uppercase y lowercase dlt. Thanks so much for listening, and best of luck.